welcome to the Construction Record. And this week we have a special about Buildings Week, which we've all been covering. And by us, I mean myself, Warren Frey, digital media editor, and also
Russell Hixson, staff writer at the Journal of Commerce.
Dawn Wall, Daily Commercial News staff writer.
And Angela Gismondi, staff writer at Daily Commercial News.
And this is the first time that Buildings Week, we've covered Buildex Vancouver, and there's Buildex Alberta, and there's a couple other ones, and Concrete Expo. All that's sort of been mushed together into one virtual conference due to the pandemic. So all of us have been covering this at the same time, which normally isn't what happens. So Russ, how about you start us off with what you've been covering over the past week?
Yeah, I think I went to a really interesting session about how to modernize and evolve procurement. Which is a sore spot, I think, in a lot of parts of the industry. And I think a lot of people on the panel, some of them are involved in associations, some of them are designers, some of them are, involved with construction companies. I know Shandos's president was on the panel, and they all were kind of saying the same thing, which is we have to move past just the lowest bid. And that's kind of, and I think it's really, really hard for the industry to do that, for a variety of reasons that they talked about. One is it's just habit. It's ingrained. It's just part of the culture, which is, you pick the lowest bid. And if you don't, you have to explain why you didn't. And, a lot of them were saying, well, they need to focus more on, building cohesive teams, building partnerships, or going with someone who might be more qualified. And they also just talked about how, it's such a short-sighted way to pick, team members, just the lowest bid. And one person even called it like a marriage. And it's like you're going to be working with these people sometimes for years, and you need to interview them and get the chemistry and see if you can work well with these people and work towards common goals. Those are some of the things that we're talking about. And, Shandos even talked about how they are starting something called social procurement, where we need to move even beyond that and also look at how we spend our money and what that says about a company's values. And they've committed to spend 5% of all their expenditures or all their spending on social things, meaning, trying to hire local workers, Indigenous workers, marginalized peoples. And let's say they buy lunch for their workers. They want to spend that money on businesses that might employ homeless people or different things like that. They want to use their spending to make the community better. And so they're trying to be more thoughtful about that. And they call that social procurement. That was a pretty interesting session that I went to.
Okay. And Don, how about you?
Yeah, the one I've enjoyed the most so far was on leaders tackle racism in the workplace. So it's full. And an Alberta moderator, so it was Alberta Buildex. Really good insights. So the two of them worked for the same company, and the two of them were with Calgary Land Corporation. So it starts off, so there weren't the noose incidents that we talk about in Ontario. So there was no references to that. But of course, the George Floyd incident got things rolling. So there was kind of a continuum. So there were conversations at home. There's two engineers, one from Zimbabwe, Nigerian born, one. So they talked about conversations they had with their children at home. So it starts at home. 17-year-old son. They're talking about what's social justice. And they're saying this is not right. So conversations at home. Then they come into work, and their colleagues are coming up to them. A bit of trepidation, maybe coming up to them hesitantly. Saying how are you doing? How are you feeling? And then comes into bosses would talk to them and say, okay, there's a bit of a institutionalization of it. So they're saying, okay, let's have a meeting. Let's have a discussion of clear the air. What are we talking about here? So you get into broader discussions, and then committees are invariably set up, and there's so inclusivity and diversity training starts. Then the head of Williams Engineering, the CEO, was on this panel. So he said, he said he sat around and he combined it with COVID. He's saying, I sat around, we're distanced from everybody anyway. So you can't have these conversations as easily. So he sent out a message, okay, let's tackle this. And it's all, Williams Engineering is already a pretty progressive firm from the sounds of it. They've got a number of initiatives they've had where they're involved in social issues. But what they thought here, okay, so especially on the climate change front, so they say, okay, now let's incorporate this, sensitivity on Black issues on racism issues into our corporate goals. Then the next step is, so these ideas, these conversations are incubating, and they're saying, okay, let's institutionalize them a bit more. Then his name is Nassim Bashir. He said, okay, let's look into internationally what's being done. The just labels movement. It's a social equity movement that firms are signing on to. So I think goes beyond just, the continuum, as I say, goes beyond conversations into what are we going to do about it? We can no longer not have these conversations. We're in the middle of it. Let's have things happen. Let's set up committees. Let's set up training. Let's reevaluate our corporate goals. And then at the end, they say, well, what would you like to happen? And it goes back to just on the personal level. The one guy says, I would just like to come to work and have a safe space and not have animosity. So just a safe place to work where there's good companionship and I can just do. So a lot's going on just from two organizations, but kind of a roller coaster every year. So that was the most interesting one. A couple of other sessions. One I attended was the very opposite of it, a technical discussion of contractor claims and enunciation of legal aspects of it. So kind of you get quite a diversity of sessions at this Billings show.
Okay, and as for me, the most interesting one I covered was how the concrete industry is dealing with COVID-19. And they went from the beginning of COVID to now. And they had two guys, Bart Canners, the president of Concrete Ontario, and Dan Hansen is the executive director of Concrete Alberta. And with Alberta and Ontario is slightly different. Alberta, to begin with, all construction was deemed as essential. So they didn't run into any problems there. But that was sort of up in the air as far as Ontario went. It was 60%, as you guys know better than I do. 60%. And so concrete was still kind of essential, but there were a lot of things they weren't serving. He said, we're one of the few people who are like, we have a plastic, for lack of a better term, product. The product's not finished by the time it goes out to whoever it's going out to. But they said the things they had to think about that they never had to before COVID sort of forced on them. Like there was the batcher will sort of dispatch everybody's trucks, and it's this sort of dance that every concrete plant's doing. But normally people would just be coming in and out of that room, and now nobody can go in and out of the room. The guys or women, whoever's in there, is sort of an air traffic controller stuck in his own little bubble. And they have to make sure nobody goes in there, because if that person goes down, they're screwed basically. But also besides that, you've also got people driving these trucks. That's another vital part of it. And you had to get new people because there's just not enough people. There's a demand for people, so which means you have to train them, which means you have to have two people in the same truck at the same time, because you can't really train these people otherwise. So they have to go through all these protocols in terms of testing, self-screening beforehand and afterwards, doing temperature checks, making sure those two people aren't getting sick. And then if you're an established driver, when you get to, let's say, some plant you're delivering concrete to, or some building site, normally they just come up and you sign something on paper, or you get a ticket, and that's not anymore. So there's all these things where if you're doing it on paper, you've got to leave it on the fender, you've got to stay in the cab, the other guy has to come out, they have to be very careful with that. And the other thing they said was that COVID kind of in a good way forced them to modernize, because concrete plants had literally vacuum tubes with dot matrix printers, and this is their words, not mine, printing out tickets that would just get shunted to the car or the truck. And that's all being changed now. Now they've got stuff like electronic tickets and GPS. And because they're using GPS, you could sort of tie that ticket to that truck. And so you can actually track what trucks are where now, which you can never do before with all this paper stuff. And it's just kind of this established thing they kept doing because it just worked. And now they're like, well, we can't do this. We literally can't have paper surfaces. So it's easier to do this with somebody's 10-inch tablet in the truck itself. So it's interesting to see how it's pushing them forward. And they said they've kind of bear in mind this is an association for the industry itself, but they're saying we've adapted well to the new normal and everything going forward. We think we're going to be okay with how things are going. But it is interesting that COVID, of all things, pushed them to adapt to a new sort of technological level they never had to before. Now we've saved the best for last because Angela covered Jeff Smith of Ellis Don's address to Buildings Week. So maybe you could tell us some of the salient points he gave.
Yeah, so it was a really, really interesting talk that he gave. So the basic message from his talk was that the industry itself is being remade and that we get the chance to kind of decide how it's remade. So that was kind of what he was telling these delegates. And he talked about, consolidation and risk margins and digitization. Those were his big 3 points. Mm-hmm. And how the industry has to work together and collaborate. Like Russ suggested earlier, he said that people, teams should compete on things other than low bid, like, trust and capability and transparency. And he said that we're not seeing that really in the industry right now, and that he used the term the death of trust. So,
well, we actually have audio, so maybe we'll cut to that right now.
Things are changing fast. Where is it taking us? I have an idealistic side. The idealistic side of me says that it could lead to a complete change in the way we work with our clients and the way construction gets procured. After all, if there aren't that many good suppliers, and I mean that for our clients and for the generals in terms of all the people we have to work with, maybe we better learn to work with the ones we've got. And maybe we can begin to compete on things other than low price, like trust, like capability, like transparency. I really believe that clients and general contractors and all of us would work with only one bidder as long as we know there's complete transparency and fairness on offer. As long as we're delivering value, we don't need the grind. And I think that may be available to us going forward. I think if builders are smart, they will no longer be commodities. But I also think that if they're smart, they'll be more transparent partners, and that will be our sustainable competitive edge. Of course, that's the idealistic side. It's not what, I don't know about you, but it's not what I'm seeing out there, what we're seeing at Ellis Don in the short run. We're seeing a harder world than we saw as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. We're seeing the death of trust. We're seeing the relationship-oriented, handshake-based business that we had for so long that I grew up with disappearing. Contracts everywhere are getting tougher. Relationships are getting more litigious. Voices are being raised when it could and should be the other way around. I think which way we go with this in a time of consolidation can largely be up to us. If we insist on fairness and if we deliver on fairness, I think we can all do very well together. But it can get ugly too. I think we're at that cleaving point right now.
Okay, and what else did Jeff talk about?
So in terms of risk and margins, he said that contractors need to stop accepting more and more risk for lousy margins. So he said he basically, took the blame as a contractor and other contractors as their fault, not the public agencies necessarily. That was interesting. And he also suggested sharing data with, openly with others in the industry. He said that's the answer. We need data. We need to collect data. It's valuable, and everybody should just openly share it. So that was, that was another one of his points, which I think we have some audio of now as well.
Construction is, it's not a building industry. We're more of an information industry. We're certainly a data-rich industry. Most of the people listening to me go on and on today aren't really builders in the truest sense anyway. We're more leaders of the process of building. So if we're going to transform this non-productive or productivity improving industry, we're going to need all the data we can find and use. So let's stop giving it away, especially for the sake of short-term efficiency goals. When we do that, we're giving away our future, and we'll have to buy it back later at much higher prices. And what we're going to see, what we're already seeing, of course, it's predictable and it's not a bad thing, is that everybody wants to own that data. The clients want to own the data. Certainly we all want to own the data in the industry, and the software firms want to own the data. It's extremely valuable. I have an answer for that. Let's give it to everybody. Let's share it openly with everybody. Let everybody use it, and let the smartest people win. But let's all of us today here in this sort of virtual room just make sure the construction industry is right in the middle of that data game. Frankly, I'd rather give all Ellis Don's data to my competitors than I would give it to Silicon Valley.
And one other thing that I caught from I've sort of skimmed through his speech beforehand, was he said that the construction is white and it doesn't look enough like Canada.
Yes, exactly. That was my next point. So he addressed these anti-racist acts that have been taking place on construction sites in the Greater Toronto area throughout the past, I guess, the spring and summer months. He basically just put a call out to the industry and said, we need to work together. We need to change this. And he encouraged other contractors, other developers, other organizations to all do their part to make the construction industry look more like Canada, is the way he put it. So that was kind of interesting as well.
We need to face the fact that we've got a problem here. Firstly, it's a very serious problem of a few really ugly people who are having, with their nooses and their graffiti, a very traumatic impact on Black and racialized people on our job sites and in the industry right now. But we also need to face the fact that this industry is far too white and has been for a long time, and that there is a thing, therefore, even in the best case scenario, of unconscious bias, and therefore we have systemic racism in this industry. But we don't have the best case scenario. I am certain there is a small but active white supremacist group active on too many of our job sites, and they are becoming more emboldened. The racist graffiti I've seen recently is the worst I've ever seen. So obviously I'm calling on everyone to do everything you can in the short term. We got to get rid of this graffiti. We got to be extra vigilant. And in the long term around systemic racism to rid our industry of this scourge. We need the construction industry to look like Canada as soon as possible. We need more BIPOC-owned construction businesses. We need BIPOC-targeted apprenticeships. We need BIPOC executives. We need to set and achieve measurable targets on all of this, and we need to get moving now. I hope we'll all be hearing more about this in the coming months, but we've got to get going.
And just as a sort of to end an overall thing, what did you guys think of the first virtual buildings? Because we've all done these things in person, and this is a little different.
I thought it was very ambitious, what they tried to do. Because they tried to have like a whole social media element to it, where you have like it's almost like they put like a LinkedIn sort of thing where you can. I got messages from people wanting to connect with me, and they have like this whole AI thing where when you register, you input a bunch of things and they try and suggest stuff to you. It was a little overwhelming, to be honest. There was a lot to click on, a lot to do, and sometimes I found it hard to find. I'm like, where do I need to go to find this thing? Because there's just so many things to do. But also, like, my purpose for being there is pretty narrow, and I'd be curious to see what some of the other attendees who are there to do kind of more networking and more things like that thought of it.
We're in this weird middle ground where they're trying to not just them, but everybody is trying to replicate what we did before, but then sort of also take advantage of what we have on hand now that we didn't really before. So you've got stuff like they'll have the wine sessions and that kind of stuff, which is great. Like you said, my focus is pretty narrow. I won't be attending that, but maybe some people will, and maybe they miss that. But I don't know how much of that works and how much of it doesn't in the virtual space.
Yeah, you know what? One of the interesting things is so we're encouraging the sector to get more and more technology savvy. But some of the events you go to don't work very well, and no one knows how to operate it, and they all seem like amateurs. So if you're spending, a few $100 million on a building and somebody can't even operate a video, at times you wonder this isn't a good sign. But I would say this went off flawlessly, really seamlessly, and obviously took a lot of work, and works very well. So hats off to the organizers for pulling it together on that front.
And what do you think, Angela?
Yeah, I just thought that a big part of this, I've been to this show a couple years in a row now, and a big part of it is the networking and the social interactions, the interviews with with people after these sessions. So that kind of part I missed, and I'm sure it could have been done virtually, but like you guys said with the platform, it was, a little bit overwhelming, a little bit, there was just a lot going on with it.
I don't think that's our fault either. It's just the virtue with the nature of the beast, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, overall, I think, we got in there, we got our sessions, we got the information from them. The other thing, I don't know if you guys went to any like panel discussions or anything like that, but I thought that was, I think the CEO breakfast that I covered with Jeff Smith, that's usually a panel discussion. It's done in a different format, but this year it was, he pre-recorded it, and then after the fact, John Mollenhauer from the Toronto Construction Association, Mark Castelletto from ConstructConnect Canada, talked about, kind of dissected what he said. So that was just a little bit different formats, I guess, for the virtual space.
And I have to wonder, like, when eventually we do go back to real life conferences, A, how many of them there are going to be, because these are probably cheaper to do, and B, if you're at a real life conference, is it just going to be a given that they're going to call people in from other parts of the world and just have them do virtual? Because we're all used to it now, so why not?
You're right.
Yeah,
it's true. More and more.
So you'll have real life and then another component. Like, for instance, let's say you've got a minister of transportation, and then you get somebody from England just to pop in instead of
it won't be weird.
Pay for a flight, right?
Like I could see offices in the future having like a whole meeting room that's like hooked up technologically just for people to do that, to have virtual meetings. And I'm sure some do now, but like I could see, an office, like an essential thing for them would be like, of course we need like a soundproof room with like a nice backdrop with a nice computer setup for people to call in and do, if they have to do kind of virtual networking, virtual meetings or give speeches or different things like that. That makes sense to me. Going forward, I think
so too.
Sure.
Yeah. Once again, I've noted previously, just the high quality of all the people, the panelists they are able to get from around the world. This is mainly got a Canadian focus, but just in general, having people, chip in from Australia who may have expertise, but I'm not sure he would have flown into a conference previously, but so now you're really getting diversity of opinion. It's only going to contribute to collaboration, people with different points of view coming together to build better things. Collaboration's the key, and diverse views to building better things. So it's good for the industry overall.
All right, and I guess with that we'll wrap up. And maybe next year we'll be recording this in person, and maybe we won't. We'll see.
We'll see.
So until next time, thanks everybody.